Then there is forfeiture, which is designed to take the profit out of crime and goes to the government. And fines, generally speaking, also go to the court system. So in all likelihood, if there was a conviction, a fine imposed does not go to the victim. Now, of course, oftentimes in the context of a case like this, in an effort to get a better resolution for the client, there certainly can be a conversation about restitution as part of any negotiated plea bargain. Having said that, there is, as I understand it, already a parallel civil case. So compensation from the standpoint of wrongdoing, from the standpoint of out-of-pocket losses, from the standpoint of pain and suffering to the family, pain and suffering to the victim. And by the way, I know I sound very cold, calculated, and clinical as we talk about this case, but let's not lose sight of the fact, and I never lose sight of the fact, that someone lost her life. Unfortunately, by what I do for a living, I do have to speak this way, but believe me, it's not lost on me that someone died, and that there are children, there's family, there's a husband who no longer has a mother, a spouse, a daughter. So believe me, it's horrifying. But strictly on the question of a fine, yeah, that money does not go to the victim. That money goes to funding the court being able to keep the lights on.
Do you think this civil case, because as we've mentioned, there's a criminal case, there's a civil one, do they influence each other? Does the civil case influence the criminal one and vice versa?
Absolutely. What happens here, that the civil case will provide free discovery for the criminal defendant. And by the same token, the criminal defendant at some point will probably move for a stay. In fact, the prosecution might move for a stay of the civil proceeding for the very reason that the prosecution doesn't want discovery given away that could impact the criminal case. And a criminal defendant can't adequately defend himself in the civil case. The defendant can't appear for a deposition, can't turn over documents which potentially might be incriminating. So what we will probably see is that the civil case will be put on a shelf until the criminal case is resolved.
And right now on your screen, what you're seeing is that body camera video that was released showing the aftermath. Now that we do have a criminal case here, do you think it was strange? Are you surprised at all that they did release this body camera video?
It's always difficult in a vacuum, and hindsight is clearly 2020. Again, at the time that this was released, there may not have been the specter or the prospect of a criminal proceeding. And then, of course, to the extent that that body cam was in the hands of law enforcement, again, the officer, law enforcement, the local law enforcement people may not have thought that there was necessarily going to be a criminal prosecution. And even so, they may have chosen to release it from the standpoint of transparency. And again, this notion that celebrities get treated better, turn it over, disclose it, let the world see what's going on.
What's next in your experience here for Alec Baldwin?
There will be an appearance. In all likelihood, that first appearance in court will be something called an arraignment, where Mr. Baldwin is advised of the charges. He will enter a plea of not guilty. And then at that point, depending on that particular jurisdiction's criminal procedure law, there may be a preliminary hearing where Mr. Baldwin has the right to challenge the proof and for a judge to determine whether or not there is reasonable cause. In other words, more likely than not, that he committed the crime. To the extent that there is a grand jury process in that jurisdiction, then there will be an indictment, or the case could proceed directly to trial once the judge determines that there is sufficient evidence for the case to go to trial. And of course, we'll all be interested in seeing whether or not there'll be an arrest warrant issued, or whether or not Mr. Baldwin will be permitted to voluntarily appear and surrender himself, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I dare say he will be released on bond.
And that's what I was going to ask. Do you think it's going to be a quick, okay, we just take a photo, he pays, and he's out? Do you think he could actually sit in jail for a little bit while we're waiting for, let's say, the arraignment?
No, his strongest arguments are going to be both to law enforcement, to the district attorney's office, and to a judge. which is, look, if I was going to go anywhere, I'd be long gone. I've been here, I've been open, I've been notorious. He's probably had lawyers working back channel for quite a period of time. So there's no concern about him being a flight risk. There's no concern that he's a danger to the community. So I'm confident in saying that his surrender will be worked out. There'll be a date and time where he will either appear at a police precinct to have his photographs taken, to be fingerprinted, and then be brought over to court, or perhaps he could surrender directly to the court. And at that point, he will be arraigned and he will go home.
So now that I know that celebrities, it appears, at least in your experience, are treated just a little more harshly, do celebrities tend to, and I don't know if you can answer this, go on trial quicker than, let's say, your average folk, or does it just kind of depend on the situation?
It absolutely depends on the situation. And as I said earlier, the advantage that a celebrity is going to have is simply the financial resources to put together a team of lawyers, a team of investigators, a team of experts. And the speed of a trial from the defense standpoint is simply a matter of, how am I going to get the best result? Am I going to get the best result by trying to catch the prosecution unprepared, in which case I want a very quick trial? In most cases, that's not the case. Prosecutors are prepared. They have their own resources, their own team. So a trial will go forward when everyone is ready for that trial to go forward.
And do you think, just again, based on your experience, that this will go to trial, or are we talking about a potential plea agreement? Because we know that one of the people who is charged, not with involuntary manslaughter, but a lesser charge, has already taken a plea deal, it appears. Is it likely that we're going to see a plea deal offered and taken by Alec Baldwin so this whole thing doesn't go to trial?
I think it would be irresponsible for anyone to weigh in on whether or not Mr. Baldwin is going to take a plea or he's going to go to trial. We don't know nearly enough about the proof. We don't know nearly enough about Mr. Baldwin's appetite to prolong this and to remain in the spotlight over this and to subject himself to the exposure of what could happen if, in fact, he is convicted. Right now, we will have to wait and see what the evidence actually is. I think there'll probably be a quicker move towards motion practice, where if I am Mr. Baldwin's attorney, I'm going to be moving quickly for discovery, and I'm going to be moving equally quickly to dismiss the indictment, arguing, look, this was a tragic accident. This was not a crime. And there will be case law, I can assure you, to back Mr. Baldwin up, that there is a sea change of a difference between an accident, a civil wrong, and a homicide, which Mr. Baldwin has been charged with. And listen, the evidence will dictate Mr. Baldwin's next path. His appetite for risk will dictate his next path, and his comfort that he will not second guess himself. In other words, if he takes a plea, will he second guess himself that he should have gone to trial? And if he goes to trial and he's not successful, will he second guess himself that he should have resolved the case?
And some great insight there for sure. My last question for you: New Mexico's Office of the Medical Investigator determined that the shooting was an accident once they completed the autopsy. Will that have any effect in your experience on a criminal case, that you have the medical investigator saying it was an accident?
Well, imagine the cross-examination of the medical examiner. Sir or ma'am, isn't it true that you determined this to be an accident? Yes, I did. No further questions. Remember, reasonable doubt is simply anytime someone needs to make an important decision in his or her life, do you have enough information to make that decision? If I go to the cardiologist today and the cardiologist tells me that I need open heart surgery, if I can schedule that surgery, I don't need any more information. I do not have a reasonable doubt. Conversely, if I say to the doctor, listen, I appreciate where you're coming from, but I want a second opinion, that means I do need more information. That's a reasonable doubt. You have a medical examiner weighing in. This is his or her responsibility to determine cause of death, manner of death, and to weigh in on what's going on here. This is a state expert, and that medical examiner wrote accident. That's built-in reasonable doubt.
All right, Randy Zellin, a lot of great information there. Is there anything else that you do want to add about all of this before I let you go?
I just think that it's so worthwhile, so